In any other year, and frankly, over the last 2 decades, probably if the West Seattle Bridge had closed and we've been going through this process, that would have dominated the news. It would have been the number one news story for the region. But unfortunately, 2020 had different plans for us. On February 29th, 2020, we had our first case of COVID-19 in King County. It was a few weeks later that during inspections of the bridge that engineers working for the Seattle Department of Transportation noticed there was accelerated cracking. Sam Zimbabwe, the director of the Seattle Department of Transportation, called me and said we needed to urgently close the bridge. It was the right thing to do, and I want to thank Sam and his team for their rapid response to that in the middle of, if people can remember, was just a very difficult few weeks at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's been difficult since then, but that was a time of heightened difficulties. It was yet another challenge that our city faced during this very hard year. I want to acknowledge the community of West Seattle, South Park, Delridge, Georgetown, and all the communities that have been directly impacted by the closure of this bridge. While it is important to the whole region, it has been particularly difficult on them. And if we could wave a magic wand to restore mobility and have a new bridge, we would do it. Unfortunately, that's not in our capability. Since the closure of the West Seattle High Bridge, we've been focused on conducting repairs to stabilize the bridge, in addition to advancing all efforts to determine whether we could repair or replace it. And Sam's team has been working under a lot of pressure because we insisted on two things: that we not lose any time, and that we make sure that we preserve both options, repair or replace, as we went through this. We've worked urgently also to mitigate the traffic and environmental impacts that this closure has had. We know it's still incredibly difficult for the communities, and that even with those mitigations, it's hard. But we have been trying and will continue to work with the communities to mitigate against those impacts. As we close the bridge, we shared that the stabilization work, the first phase of this, would take until the first part of 2021. The good news is we're on track for that. We have lost no time in the stabilization as we've gone through this process to evaluate the options for replacement or repairing the bridge, getting community input, and working with the technical experts as well as the task force. After weekly briefings in the last 8 months and dozens of town halls, meetings, conversations with small businesses and local leaders, engineers, and community, and having appeared and talked to members of the task force, and having read all of their comments on what we should do, I've made the decision that we will move forward in repairing the bridge. We will get the stabilization repairs as quickly as we can. As we narrowed the half dozen options in recent months to these two key options, repair or replacement of the midspan, I saw the benefits and risks of both. I will tell you, I went into this process with a bias of replacement. And full replacement, as we know, was eliminated as an option because it simply took too long and cost too much. When making the decision between the repair option and the replacement of the midspan, I weighed a number of really key principles. The first, of course, was safety. I made it clear, and Sam made it clear to me, that we could only consider the path forward that our engineers and our technical advisors assured us would be technically feasible and safe for the traveling public. We also looked at the speed to restore mobility. It has been a priority from day one to restore mobility in this corridor. It is the workhorse of Seattle. It carries over 100,000 trips a day in usual circumstances. It is a key corridor for freight for the port, which is one of the economic drivers, not just of Seattle, but of our whole region. We also needed certainty. And while I will talk about in a minute, each of the options has risk. We wanted to make sure that looking at the options, we used the lens to determine what had the greatest amount of certainty to restore mobility in a reasonable time frame at a cost where funding was obtainable. We also looked at the impacts on the communities, both and how long the bridge was out, how long it took to replace it, and what that looked like in replacing. We know that we wanted to minimize the impacts on the Duwamish Valley, and West Seattle, as well as the adjoining neighborhoods and communities and the port. Jobs and economic recovery are critical to our city. COVID-19 has just taken an incredible hit on our small businesses and our workers. And while we're fortunate to have sectors of the economy that have been able to continue, like our construction industry and our tech industry, the port jobs are critical, not just for today, but for the future of our recovery. I'm very focused on building our city back, not to where it was before, but to be better and more equitable. This corridor has a strong and significant impact on the jobs and the workers at the Port of Seattle. Not just today, but what we have planned for the future. Terminal 5 will be an incredible, important economic driver for our city and for our region. I had contacts with and worked with the port and SSA who leased that. We were at risk for losing those jobs and the improvement of the port if we cannot restore mobility. I also looked and relied heavily on community input and the input of our technical advisors. After dozens of town halls and listening to people, talking to the task force, conversations with local officials, it was clear to me that there was pros and cons on each of the options. And not surprising for Seattle, people were pretty much split down the middle. But the factors that I just viewed were the factors that everyone seemed to be focused on, as well as how do we make sure that we are looking to the future? Not just restoring the mobility of today, but how do we look to the future and make sure that we're looking at mobility for the future that is climate friendly and better. Moving forward with repair. So given those factors, I made the decision that we'll move forward with repairing the high-rise bridge. Work has already begun. That's the important thing people to know. The work we have been doing to shore up the bridge is the path to repair. And we anticipate that we will be able to restore live load by mid-2022. Over this year, we've been stabilizing the bridge. SDOT looked at a series of options. And that was everything from a submersible tunnel to full replacement, to just shoring up the bridge, to repairing the bridge. As I said, full replacement was eliminated because it's just too costly and takes too long. And it did not move us to a place where we could reduce car traffic. 10, 15, and 20 years from now, we should be a city that is not reliant on vehicles and cars. We need to be moving to a more climate-friendly options. That left us two options, repair or the replacement option, sometimes dubbed the rapid repair because it was rapid replacement because it was rapid compared to full replacement. But it only replaced the midspan. I will tell you that I want to thank Sam and his team because as we eliminated the replacement option, we talked a lot about coming up with options for a quicker replacement scenario. And Sam and his team looked across the United States to Asia to Europe to see examples there. And when we found that rapid replacement or the replacement of the midspan, I was very intrigued. I thought maybe we had found it. It was in many ways on paper exactly what we were looking for. It was a longer period of time, 2 years for repair versus 3 years for replacement. But it has some significant hurdles that at the end of the day made me the decision that we would do repair. Because of the tight timeline that SDOT brought to me, which I asked them to do, a very aggressive schedule, we could not afford any significant delays, hurdles, or challenges, or it would move that time frame for replacement forward maybe significantly. And this include obtaining the financing, finishing permitting, finishing consultations with the tribes, making sure that we get the financing from the federal government, and was clear that we could not begin demolishing the bridge till we had certainty that we would have the financing for this much more expensive option. That's a commitment I had to make to the people of Seattle. And after looking at that timeline and exploring what a realistic timeframe for both financing and permitting and the environmental reviews, it was clear that I could not look the voters and people in Seattle in the eye and say we'd be back on that bridge in 3 years. And then all likelihood, it would be longer than that. And a cost of $400 to $600 million, I knew that the federal financing would be difficult to obtain. We've had many conversations with our delegation. I want to really emphasize they've been extremely supportive, and I know they'll go to work for the city of Seattle. as will members of our state delegation. But in conversations, we had hoped that we would have a federal infrastructure bill this year and that we could put this replacement of the West Seattle Bridge in the queue for that. It didn't happen for all the reasons we've seen in Washington, D.C. and its dysfunction. But in conversations I've had, including speaking with the chair of the House Committee on Transportation and Housing, it is anticipated that they won't take up an infrastructure bill until sometime next year and might not complete it until late next year. That would push our very aggressive schedule by a significant period of time. Because again, in order for this to work, we had to get permitting, financing before we started demolition. And once we started demolition, have a very rapid schedule in which we could also at the side be creating the structure. Our experience in other projects in Seattle also told us that the permitting and environmental review schedule that we had laid for was very aggressive. It required that just in 12 months, by the end of next year, we'd be done with all of that environmental permitting and our consultations. And we know that many of those decisions are outside our control. And looking at other projects, there are many that have taken longer. There are some that have met that time schedule, but the risk was too great. This corridor is just too critical to let the schedule slip by months, let alone years. We know that repair will get us reconnected the fastest. But I also know that we have to plan for redundancies and the future. The greatest risk with the repair scenario is that we don't know how it will operate under load conditions. So Seattle Department of Transportation will continue with studying a replacement for this bridge. Our engineers have said that this will last between 15 and 40 years, including our outside experts. We also know that we have to look at that type, size, and location study because we will have to replace this bridge at some point. We also know that Sound Transit will be building a bridge in this corridor in the coming years, later this decade. I think it's time to start a conversation with Sound Transit on whether that bridge can do more than just carry light rail. As we look into the future, we know that we as a region will continue to grow. Our jobs will grow at the port, West Seattle will grow, and we have to be looking at infrastructure that will carry us into the future.